This is RegCast, your edge on RegTech, risk, and regulatory transformation. Hosted by RegTech pioneer PJ DiGiamarino, RegCast delivers regulatory clarity, AI precision, and market trust with expert insights from the front lines. From MiFID 3 to AI, we connect regulation to execution, charting the path to credible compliance before gaps become capital or reputational risks. Subscribe on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or at regrisklegalsolutions.com and stay ahead of the regulatory curve. PJ DiGiamarino is one of the original architects of RegTech. With a career spanning Barclays, McKinsey, and his pioneering work at JWG Group, PJ has spent the last 20 years helping regulators and financial institutions decode complexity and transform compliance into competitive advantage. Now, as CEO of RegRisk Legal Solutions, he's at the forefront of AI-enabled regulatory intelligence.
Hi, welcome to RegCast Season 7. We're in Episode 3 looking at one simple shift. Supervisors have gotten hands-on to invasive supervision, and the evidence really matters. In the first two episodes, we covered the fact that architecture is really now critical to proof, and that the templates that the regulators are using have really broken. And even since the last conversation in which we talked about major moves from ESMA, the ECB, the EBA, and the Bank of England, PRA, around their data strategies, there's been another big update that really helps nail the fact that the convergence between the prudential view of life and the transactional view of life is happening. And I'm talking about the ESMA, which is the European supervisory body for the markets, has now agreed as of January that the ECB is going to get access to their MiFIR data. So ultimately, what firms can expect is that there are multiple views of their truths that are being reconciled by the regulators. The prudential and the statistical views typically have happened very separate from the transactional views. So it'll be very interesting when the regulators start to mine these two data sets, use their AI data fabrics, and come up with a perspective on the firm that we can only imagine was going to make the levels of quality perception go down, not up. And this is a big deal for everybody in the transaction reporting space because there's a lot moving for MiFIR itself. It's currently a system that produces over 15 billion transaction reports every year. So ultimately, any tweaks you need to make to it in real time really can be quite painful. So firms are being asked to rebuild these capabilities without stopping the business, and that's not a future risk, that's a risk that's here and now. And it's really a transition that some of these industry experts are very up to speed on, and I'm really pleased to be able to bring this conversation to the fore today. Nicolas, can we start with you, please, and do a quick introduction on your role at Natixis?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Nicolas Pessard. I'm head of Transaction Regulatory Reporting Factory at Natixis CIB. So I'm in charge of various reporting regime like EMIR, MiFIR, SFTR. So I've been there for 4 years already. I was before editing the product solution at Murex software editor. So I have some experience on regulatory reporting solution. I participated to SFTR Go Live and also to MiFID 2 Go Live. And I had some occasion to work also on the various refit and rewrite that we had the past few years.
Excellent. And you're a DRR enthusiast, is that true?
Exactly. So we have a project to deploy CDM DRR in Q1 this year, probably. So indeed, I've been involved into this implementation as well.
Fantastic. And Mark, welcome back to RegCast. Thanks for coming on. Why don't the DRR has been something we've spoken about in the past. Why don't you introduce your perspectives this year?
Thank you, PJ. Yeah, Mark Ratakos, I'm the managing partner at TradeHeader. We are a consulting company focused on data standards. So CDM is the DRR, but also FPML, FIX, ISO 2022. We do training, consulting, and custom software development in those standards. We have been involved in the ESDR project since the beginning of the project, but also we have lots of experience with OTC and also derivatives in general, and also on the securities and payment space.
Fantastic, and thank you very much for coming back. And Andrew, you're a newbie to the Regcast listeners, though you're probably no stranger to many of the folks in the space. Why don't you introduce what you're up to now and how this all fits into your remit?
Yeah, thanks, PJ. So Andrew Pinnington, I'm the head of growth and international client coverage at D2CC. Obviously, D2CC, the largest global trade repository, and we're introducing our new kind of ARM functionality across the UK and EU MiFID over the course of this year. In terms of my credentials in the reporting space, I've run various functions at large investment banks in the reg reporting area, and spent the last few years advising significant firms on buy side and sell side in terms of how to implement control frameworks, improve their overall architecture, and get them ready for significant reg go lives as well. So like it or not, I've been involved in this space for the past 15 years and I can't actually seem to escape it, but yeah, never mind.
But whether you like it or not, it likes you.
Well, it tolerates me, yeah.
There's a market. It keeps pulling you back into it.
Yeah.
It's the Hotel California, and you never get away. Just to accept it. There are three things that I really want to get to in the next 4 million transaction reports, which is only a half an hour. The first is that this reform is really in flight, in that there are lots of issues and challenges with the current system, and ultimately that confidence is the control fabric that the firms rely upon to deal with their regulators. So this is not any thing to mess around with. The second is that the correlation we talked about earlier with the prudential data and the other transactional data out there really exposes some of the weak semantics that are currently in the industry today. And these different interpretations and validations really matter. We need to think about how we're sharing those more, not less. And then ultimately, I want to get to the role of AI, because everyone wants to figure out what the silver bullet is, and ultimately we need to surface any inconsistencies and think about how do we actually get the most out of these new Gen AI models, and how do we get automation without magnifying existing weaknesses. So I'd like to turn first to you, Andrew, in terms of what breaks first. And when firms are forced to rebuild the transaction reporting, what are some of the challenges that you're seeing across the industry?
Yeah, it's a great question. Kind of 3 overarching areas, I guess. So if you think about reporting systems, they really sit at a kind of intersection between execution, the firm's broader data architecture, and regulatory interfaces. So any type of rebuild touches multiple upstream systems, multiple layers of data transformation, integrating all the external items like, I don't know, ref data and things like that. And then you have to meet fairly rigid regulatory validation rules. So avoiding those semantic data failures is quite hard in such a complex architecture. Secondly, and you kind of alluded to it earlier, but documentation and data lineage are always fairly significant challenges for firms in any big rebuild, particularly around eligibility, for example, for something like MiFID or MiFIR, which is really complex. Has this been traded on venue? Is the product in scope? Exactly when should it be submitted in the case of an RTS2 report? Is the life cycle event in scope, etc., etc.? The logic to just send a report out of the door and transform it into the kind of valid format and populate the fields correctly is really complex. And if any of that isn't written down, or it's in code, or worse, someone's head, you're in real trouble. And our consulting group, for example, often have to help firms reverse engineer that type of intelligence. And lastly, the bit that firms often overlook and really kind of leave value on the table, so to speak, is the post-submission functionality too. So particularly around managing exceptions, reconciling books and records to what has been sent to the ARM, and and ultimately back reporting anything that was submitted incorrectly. So at DTCC, we're trying to alleviate the pain of that a bit with our universal correction engine within the arm, and through identifying issues via trade reporting analytics, our kind of benchmarking and anomaly detection solution. But firms still need the ability to have workflow for these items, and identifying, managing exceptions, remediating and resubmitting is something that firms have historically probably not focused enough on in terms of the rebuild of their systems.
Thank you for that overview. I think the holistic laying out that framework is critical. Nicola, what's your experience, from having to do multiple implementations in this space?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I had the occasion to work on the rewrite and refit that took place last year, last years, and I could talk about two different issues I could get. So indeed, interpretation is one of them, because when the project reviews a regulatory requirement, generally there is room for interpretation because lack of accuracy, lack of example. So indeed, Andrew, you talk about eligibility. So eligibility is one a complex topic for MiFID, so it's very complex. Also, the way life cycle events should be reported can have different interpretation. And so because there is this room of interpretation across firm, at the end of the day, you get the firm sending data with divergence to the regulator, which is obviously not what the regulator wants. So it will impact strongly the data quality and the capacity for the regulator to use it, of course. The second point I would talk about is about the time-consuming reconciliation, because each time a field is moving, it will generate breaks because the logic is new and so it is unstable. And for some complex field, more time will be needed to get stability in the reporting. The time that enough use cases have been executed and that you get a robust process. Second point is also that the data lineage is very fragmented between systems. So the controls are very time consuming to execute because it's a nightmare for operational team to make sure that each field is correct. And because many issues are discovered later in the project implementation during the testing phase, so the cost of correction is very significant for the firm, because sometimes you have to review the design of the solution. And at the end, it will force you to re-execute all the test case many times. So this is very challenging for project like rebuild with hard deadline. So the project will have to deliver quick shortcut to be ready on time, but with some process not enough robust, and probably because it's very time consuming, some test case cannot be run because lack of time as well.
And that's there's a lot of stakeholders involved in what you just described, right? There's the individual system owners, there's the operational folks that have to look at all the data, there's the data owners themselves. Now, from your point of view, when a regulator comes and points their finger and says, "Tell me about that transaction," what's the reaction, and how does the organization have to come together to be able to answer that question?
Yeah, actually, that's complex because we have many IT involved because many transaction system. So basically, when we have to explain the result, we need to have clear data lineage from the reporting till each transaction system. And as Andrew mentioned, yet there is also the execution platform involved. So the data lineage is very fragmented and complex with several layers that are very difficult to handle. So it's very time consuming when the situations that you described happen. And so it needs lots of synchronization with multiple teams in the bank, indeed.
Well, you said time consuming, but I also heard costly, because these are not low cost resources, right? These are some of the real SMEs and experts that could be out making money and running the business.
Yes, indeed.
So what's the pressure, from a firm's point of view right now? Is this hey, we gotta make this more efficient? Is it we need the quality to be able to help us in our day jobs? What's the driver for regulatory assurance, around this reporting space within a firm?
So the driver is actually trying to reduce, data fragmentation. So basically, reducing the data points is one driver to basically to be more efficient and to increase the data quality. But the driver at the end of the day is the data quality. We are exposed to the regulator, and because the regulator has strong expectation on data quality, we have to look after our data quality, and in order to ensure this, we need to reduce the multiple data models that we have in the firm. So that's not an easy job, and this is what we want to do over the next few years.
Right. So Mark, you've been in this game for a while. Data quality has always been part of the conversation. It's part of that discussion about what always breaks. What's your perspective on this?
Yeah, I like to build on top of what Nicolas and Andrew mentioned. I think when a firm starts one of these projects, one of the first things is about how we're gonna standardize some of the data to be able to report this data in a consistent and effective way, right? And Nicolas mentioned like the standardization of events, and that's a hard point for firms to be able to standardize that across multiple systems. I would add even like the product qualification, product categorization is even a problem for some firms. Being able to classify the product and get an identifier, it's even a problem for some of the projects, because you need a way to consistently send the information and semantically identify the type of product. So that's one of the issues. The other is Nicolas mentioned around testing. What we face is that clients, as was mentioned, we have testing at the end of the process, potentially using the TR. But if we get issues, it's late, and they're really hard to fix, because as mentioned, there are multiple layers. You have to go back to the source of the problem, and that's costly, and sometimes there are hard deadlines that you need to accomplish, right? So that's the other point. And the last point is that some of these projects come with a change of system or a change of vendor within firms. And you need to be aware that with those changes, there are hidden implementations, hidden layers of abstraction that may happen on those systems, and that needs to be reevaluated and re-implemented within the firm. So it's always critical to have a clear strategic vision on these regulatory reporting projects, because changes will happen in existing systems that will create even more stress to the teams that are involved in the project. So these are like key factors, I think, in some of these rewrites implementations.
Those are all great points. And standards, testing, vendor selection. Andrew, it leads me back to you. I guess to what extent? I mean, as you see these tests getting more and more detailed, as the discussion about DRR helps us understand the semantics better. What can be done, and moving forward to help meet the regulators' need for more clarity around how these particular transactions are being reported, and going back to their underlying systems, what quality and what the definition of good looks like?
Yeah, I think again, documentation and data lineage are super important, both for firms in the implementation phase, but also to be able to explain to the regulators what's going on. And I'm sure we'll touch on later the kind of applicability of AI around some of that as well. But ultimately, data quality, again, is you get into discussions around canonical data models. I think part of the challenge is that firms historically have thought about different systems to meet different regulations, almost treating them as completely different implementations. And that's because they were separate projects. So historically treated as a kind of project outcome rather than different rule sets on the same platform. So getting those canonical data models across regimes with counterparty information, instrument data, events, identifiers, core economics, and then applying kind of jurisdiction specific slices on top of that model rather than bespoke schemas, bespoke implementations. Getting a common event and life cycle model is super important as well. You shouldn't have 4 different ways of describing a notional upsize on an interest rate swap across your organization, for example. And then joining that up to golden sources for reference data and a clear kind of identifier model to help pull it all together and pull together different transactions. Nicola mentioned and I mentioned earlier around eligibility, actually determining what should go to those regulators in the first place and having that really clearly documented is really important. The time of having that logic almost built into upstream systems is definitely over. Having that core reporting eligibility engine is really important. Again, something that you can expose directly to regulators if need be and show them you're working, so to speak. But again, I touched on this earlier. Firms leave a lot of value on the table in not using the same control framework across their regimes. So things like front to back completeness checks, field level accuracy checks, pre-submission validations, volume pattern monitoring, exception management and workflow. I mean, it's testing as well. Like firms can implement these kind of gold batch regression packs and have those fairly standard across regimes and again, simulation harnesses in a production parallel environment. There's a huge amount that firms can do to kind of stabilize both what they're looking to do during transitions, but also make it more explicable to the ultimate consumers of that data, which is incredibly important.
Yeah, I think that's that explainability point that's really key, and because there are many different actors with their own unique perspectives on that, uplift of a notional example that you gave for an interest rate swap, and that's where the semantics really become key, and that the new tooling to be able to manage the semantics matters. So if you have something called an ontology, you can pull in those various different descriptions and bring them all together. In fact, Mark, you were on stage with one of our colleagues from JP Morgan in January talking about this very issue. And I think that one of the things I learned from that was that you're able to take the common domain model, which is the industry's representation of that asset class, and think about it as a knowledge graph. Take that ontology and use that within the firm. Would you concur with that? Or are you seeing that happening in practice?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the whole idea of standardization of the events and products. I think you need these common data structures, but also like validation rules on top of that. And I think that the common domain model is a perfect tool to do that. Related to reporting, I think if we use the common domain model for reporting, a key thing there is governance. So the ability to have this shared interpretation of the rules and being able to standardize that layer, I think it's key. And going back to Andrew's point here, and this common framework for reporting across multiple jurisdictions, I totally agree with that. We are seeing firms reusing between 80 to 85% of the code that they are using for one jurisdiction to another. For example, we had an EMIR, a firm like implementing EMIR and then the Asia Pacific jurisdictions, and that firm was able to reuse almost 85% of the code. So there is a huge level of overlap between jurisdictions. Obviously, and that applies to the extraction logic to report, but also validation rules. So I think that's great. Obviously, there is still 15, 20%, which is hard. There is a huge reuse between them. And but going back to the point, it all makes sense if there is a shared interpretation, if there are common semantics, as you mentioned, and if there is a governance framework that agrees on those interpretations.
Absolutely. And I think, Nicola, this goes right back to the conversation you were having earlier about the individual implementations. Are you seeing that reuse in practice? Are you able then to define it once for one project and build on it as opposed to have to start from scratch?
Yeah, so actually what is in place indeed, what was built in the past was to implement all the regime in silo, okay, as in many banks, all projects have been implemented this way. But indeed now there is a real will to implement a centralized environment to manage several regime at the same time. Now the path to go from silo to this type of architecture is not simple, because of course we have many control. All the ones that Andrew mentioned can go from volume check, pairing matching, all type of data quality controls that have been put in place are there. There is a production team organized with many people that work on that. So when you start factorizing one environment that combine all this jurisdiction together, there is a path to be found so that you don't disrupt too much the production. So that's the complexity from going to the old situation to the new one. And this is what is happening today with the implementation of CDM-DRR in our landscape. Yeah.
Tell me more about how that actually works then. So how does the CDM-DRR help with the mitigating against any of these transition risks?
Actually, it mitigates. It's because currently we have many transaction systems, as I mentioned. Okay, so we'll have an intermediary data model which is unique for all our transactions. So that's the first improvement that will be there, because today, because of the legacy situation with many regulatory regime built in silo, basically some data are duplicated, some processes are duplicated, but at the end of the day, that's same data and same control that should be run on that. Okay, so a unique data model is definitely something that helps definitely with a clear data definition. The second point that is really helpful is basically that the regulation is delivered as prepackaged code. Okay, so it's not text, and so the room for interpretation is much lower compared to what we were implementing before. So that's a very important point. Also, because we are not the only one to use these processes, because they are shared with other participants of the industry. At the end, you get some processes that have been already tested by others, so you don't spend too much time to validate them, and so you can concentrate on wider test scope, and you don't need to test so much the processes that have been delivered and prepackaged by the industry. Yeah. So that's basically what is interesting in this.
So it's taken what was text and allowed you to come up with your interpretation, but take it then to your code in your validation pack so that you're actually able to focus on what matters, which is the wiring back to all the original source systems.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Fantastic. Andrew, you mentioned AI. It's been a couple minutes on AI. It's not all about AI, but how is AI helping here?
It wouldn't be a podcast without talking about AI, would it? So look, I'm not an AI expert, but there are some good applicable use cases for AI in this space. I think the key is drawing the boundaries around it though. So AI shouldn't be determining whether a trade's reportable, for example. It shouldn't be determining the final field values. It shouldn't be changing rule packs or configurations directly in production environment, in my view. Those kind of reg obligations need to stay in transparent data lineage and rules and code. but I kind of see AI as an enabler around that to make it easier to make changes in a safe way, easier to explain the data to regulators, which is something we touched on already. And probably the best use case is easier to monitor. So I think you can see real AI benefit and value in things like anomaly detection and spotting unusual patterns, volume monitoring, really being able to discern whether there's an issue before you might have seen it through both human intervention or kind of static rules being run against it. Um, Things like schema mapping and transformation assistance. Mark is far more technical than me, and he'll be able to talk through all of those schema changes. But things like that, AI is pretty good at and explaining. It's in this X path in this schema, it translates to this X path in the new schema. Still needs human approval and testing, but AI can kind of shorten the analysis phase. The other bit, and the lawyers won't be happy to hear this, but reg comparisons and legal comparisons and structure guidance. So what changed for MiFIR field X in RTS 22 between this version and that version? What are the changes coming down the track? That kind of horizon scanning capability, I think AI has definitely got value in as well. And last but not least, kind of advanced reconciliation and exception handling or triage, almost AI, being that kind of co-pilot for investigation, asking, okay, well, here's a trade with these fields. Where do you think it might have gone wrong, given that it's come from these systems, et cetera, et cetera? So almost that investigation partner. But I think there are definite benefits, but it's drawing the boundaries around what AI can and can't do safely in this kind of production environment that is of critical importance.
So I want to come to Mark on this, because what I'm picking up from Andrew is it's not the known knowns. I mean, we have our logic that we can test for all the time about, are these rules being satisfied? It's the known unknowns. And it's the go help me understand what's happening that might be breaking and come back to me. But Mark, have I picked that up correctly?
Yeah, that's right. I think one of the things that Andrew mentioned, I think it's critical, is to have someone, a human, that supervises some of the work that the AI is doing for you. Just to add on top of what Andrew mentioned, we're using AI as well on the DRR project to make sure that the code that we are delivering to firms like Natixis is good quality. And AI is great for that, but also to make sure that we include all the decision-making process that has happened during the working group activities, and that gets translated into the implementation of a rule. Since, as you know, like DRR is based on the interpretation of the members of the project and the participants on the project, we need to make sure that the code is well documented and contains all the rationales, all the decision-making process that has happened there. And AI helps hugely with that, because it's capable of processing lots of documentation and being able to suggest like annotations and code in documentation that I think increases the value of DRR hugely. So there are some use cases that I think they work great. And another scenario we were using it is as trying to generate synthetic data so we can use to test things like DRR, CDM, and it's getting there as well. So without having to rely on firms submitting data, and there are lots of problems with that in terms of compliance and security, we think AI can help us generating test of data that we can use for testing some of these implementations.
So Nicola, Andrew and Mark have laid out a full spectrum of AI use. What are you finding most valuable?
So for AI, what we have implemented and what we are using in our legacy architecture is basically we try to explain the root cause of our rejections and orphans that we manage for the regulatory reporting. So basically, we save time for the analysis with this. So and the next target would be to try to automate the remediation following the explanation of the root causes. Okay, so we want our goal with AI is basically to reduce operational workload on the analysis of rejections and orphan. What we call orphan is basically the comparison between our internal books and records and the ARM or basically the TR. Yeah.
Fantastic. So I want to move to closing statements. There's been a lot here. I'm going to help people get their heads around it. Andrew, 60-second takeaway from you. What did you get? What was your message to the market and in terms of the 2026 agenda? And the second part of that, of course, is at our conference on the 26th of March. What are some of the key things people should be tuning into and coming there to hear?
Yeah, I think now is a really good time to look at your data architecture and the way in which your platform works. But to the point I was raising earlier, firms need to move to that platform mindset rather than thinking about these separate, almost project-based implementations. They should be looking at having, a canonical data model across regimes that they can apply the regime-specific, almost cookie cutter on top of. Reporting eligibility engines that sit across all of the regimes, and again, a control framework and a testing environment that allows them to apply the most efficient, but also the kind of safest and most compliant solution on top of everything they're doing, rather than treating them all in isolation. And I think now is a great opportunity for firms to do that with change, slightly dialing back than it has been over the past couple of years. It's time to kind of fix the roof while the sun's shining, so to speak.
Excellent. Well, we look forward to your messaging at the conference about that. Nicola, can you please give us the same statement?
Yeah, so what I would recommend is stop building things in silo and fragmented logic for each regime. So standardization of the data and processes and reusability is clearly the path to be followed. So indeed, the MiFIR UK reforms that is coming can be a good opportunity to start looking at the architecture. Because indeed, all firms are facing the same problem, having lots of operational workload on many reporting regimes at the same time. So we need to try to factorize as much as possible and to increase data quality as much as we can. Yeah. So.
And why? Yeah. What's the message about why now? Why should people be coming to the 26th of March to engage in this conversation as opposed to doing something else?
Yeah, so basically we will have some passionate exchange between us to discuss this aspect in detail and to share our experience of what can help the participant, and this helps can apply to sell side participant and as well to buy side, because it's also how reducing reporting costs and how it can bring a safer foundation for AI-driven automation.
Fantastic, Mark.
Yeah, I think we are living in a time where there are huge technology changes, and I think AI, machine learning, smart contracts will completely transform the way we work in the industry and the way we operate. And I think the March conference will provide a set of tools, but also insights on how we can think about regulatory reporting in a more strategic way, right? So being able to apply these new technologies to fundamentally change the way we are developing regulatory reporting projects.
Well, thank you, the three of you, for those contributions. I wholeheartedly concur and think that this is a foundational moment. We do have a shift in regulation, a shift in the reporting construct, and a shift in the technology itself. And this for the industry is a great chance to engage, because, as Andrew put it, the sun is shining a little bit, so we need to fix the roof now because the rain is coming, and ultimately there's a risk here of not getting this conversation together. So there's a bit of urgency from that perspective as well. So, this is not going to go away. This is going to keep going on, but we are fundamentally at a different place. If MiFIR, reporting, AI, governance, cross-regime control is on your agenda, please come join in the conversation physically. Stay tuned here for more on the topics overall in terms of how we think about getting the year of 2026 control further down the track. You can find all the details on the regtechconference.co.uk. If you want to check out the agenda, and all of the show notes will take you directly to where all the article and thinking is published around this. Thank you very much to our sponsors, and thank you much for the audience for tuning in. We'll be back in your feeds again soon. Thank you, guys.
You've been listening to Regcast, delivering regulatory clarity, AI precision, and market trust. Please subscribe and share. It helps more people join this vital conversation. Find all episodes on Apple, Spotify, or at regrissolutions.com.